The bad part about AI is the better you create your product, the value of seats start going down. So if you say my product is 10x better, the company would require 10x lesser number of seats from your product. When we started building Flexprice, 31% of the entire software companies were doing usage-based pricing. Now that number is 75%. All the huge organizations, which were the stalwarts of subscription and seat-based pricing, have moved towards usage-based pricing. So will we be able to go back to a simpler subscription-based pricing? The answer is no. Will the pricing evolve from here into different variations or purpose? Yes.
Welcome back to Terminal Value. I'm Nick Singh. Today I'm joined by Manish Choudhary, co-founder and CEO of Flexprice, an open source billing and metering platform for AI and API first companies. Flexprice recently raised a $1.5 million seed round led by Sastra VC. This episode is about a simple but important shift. AI is breaking the old seat-based SaaS model. As pricing moves towards usage and outcomes, billing starts to look less like admin software and more like core infrastructure. And if billing becomes infrastructure, we'll talk about how open source may become a real wedge into the market. Now, onto the episode. Manish, thank you so much for joining.
Nick, thanks for having me here.
So before we get into Flexprice, I'd love to start off with an overview on the space, particularly the pricing and billing space. How has software pricing really evolved over the last handful of years to get us to this point?
So thanks again for having me here. And I think it's a good question to start with. So I generally break down software pricing in 2-3 specific domains. So I say there is the SaaS, the pre-SaaS pricing, where you used to say, hey, there's this floppy disk, I have downloaded my software here, and you can just pick the disk to your system and do an on-prem deployment with it, right? So you used to charge a one-time licensing fee if you want to add a management on top of it. So you pretty much put up a person there who will just manage the software for you, right? Companies like Salesforce come into the picture, companies like Zendesk of the world. These guys come in and said, hey, we are building a software that we will sell to human, right? And the direct proxy is this software will augment the work that humans do, right? For example, if I am using HubSpot, right? I used to maintain these manual sheets. Now I can do it on HubSpot and see where my leads are flowing, how my conversations are going, and so on and so forth. So these companies started selling subscriptions and seats, right? Which was a fairly good model, worked really well for 15, 20 years. But now what started happening was AI started to come up and gave twofold challenge to these kind of pricing model. First one was the size of teams were collapsing rapidly, right? So when seat-based pricing was a thing, you need a person to sell a seat, right? Now what was happening was a 200 team company is shrink down to, let's say, 50 people, right? You have less salespeople, you have more engineering folks, right? And the fundamental rule of pricing your product was always to price your product with closer to the value. Value started becoming the outcome of the product, right? So then you started finding a niche spot in between and say, hey, my COGS pretty much as a company rely on how much you use the products, right? If you are a heavy user of the product, you'll be using my product more, but seats make less of a sense. And that's how our company started moving from seat-based pricing to a usage-based pricing model. This can have various implications, right? It can have hybrid pricing model, seat, and a combination of that, credit pricing models, and so on and so forth. And now what we are seeing is when AI has become more and more powerful, we are able to solve a lot of more things with agents, MCPs, and stuff. Now people would want it to work closer to the outcomes. And hence we are seeing new examples of companies doing outcome-based pricing. HubSpot's recent agent launch, Intercom's Fin is a great example. So these are some of the examples of companies who have launched a pricing model which is closest to where a consumer feels value, right? But the core fundamental of how a software should be priced is same as how much value can you deliver and how does your customer perceive that value. So you need to clear that intersection and say this is what the right price point is.
That makes sense. Could you give a brief overview on how historically, prior to the AI-based pricing model changes that we're seeing, who are the players that have helped provide the pricing, the billing software for companies to go utilize, or has that been more do-it-yourself in the past?
Yeah, so I think when we started building Flexprice, and we'll talk about it when we talk about it, pretty much all of the software pricing was seat-based pricing, and there were 3 ways people were generally doing it. So there were companies like Stripe, companies like Chargebee, who were building subscription based billing modules, right? Which is your subscription will turn once in a month, right? At the end of the month, if you have 10 seats, we'll charge for 10 seats, right? If you have 5 seats, you have reduced or upgraded it. There are simpler workflows to it, right? So Stripe, ChargeBee built massive businesses. Stripe's billing business is like $500 million already, right? In last 2 to 3 years, there has been quite a lot of stress on these kind of business models, and hence companies like Flexprice exist in the first place, right? Where we say, hey, if the entire value that you are providing to your customer is reaching closer to the outcomes, why not price closer to the outcomes, right? Why just say I'm going to sell you 20 seats, but it doesn't get any outcome to it, right? And that's why the new kind of companies started coming in. And the third way people used to charge previously was building this entire thing in a homegrown billing arrangement, right? So there you need to have like 5 engineers constantly working on that. Your payable cycles are slow, your receivable cycles are slow, your revenue recognition takes a lot of time, your finance team is always juggling with a lot of data coming in, your contracts are out of sync, right? So all of
Mhm.
those revenue leaks used to happen. And yeah, I think this is how we generally define how the past looks like, how the future would look like for us.
What is the simplest way to then explain what FlexPrice does?
Yeah. So I'll tell you two folds of what the grander vision of FlexPrice is, and now what exactly are we solving today, right? So internally, when we talk about FlexPrice, we talk about, hey, there has not been a cursor movement for finance teams, right? So people have automated engineering, people have automated marketing quite a lot, people have automated content creation a lot, but finance as a space has not been automated, right? There are quite a lot of manual workflows that are being done there, right? The reason for that is finance does not work on 99% accuracy. These systems work on 100% accuracy, 100% auditability, and 100% accountability, right? If you cannot build a product that is closer to these kind of metrics, you cannot pretty much say that, hey, I have built an agent and now it will replace your entire systems, right? So we want to say, hey, we want to build the only AI layer who's automating the entire revenue stack for you, right? It would mean your billing, your revenue recognition, your collections, your receivables, your DSOs. So once your contract is closed with a customer, right? Everything post that until the first dollar hits your account, this is where FlexPrice will exist in the future. So we said, what is like the most complex piece in this entire puzzle, right? What gives us the fastest wedge to go in, right? So today, the biggest shift that was happening was a lot of these companies were moving from a seat-based pricing to a usage or to an outcome at some point in time. And that was challenging the current billing systems. And that's why we said the great answer to this is why not build a really robust usage based pricing and metering engine, right?
Mhm.
And just start with that and then slowly expand into more broader AI related revenue workflows on top of it. So, yeah, so today, if you look at FlexPrice, FlexPrice is a usage based pricing and billing module where we work with some of the top AI companies, infrastructure companies who would want to price their customers the way they want to. So we have named FlexPrice as FlexPrice and not Flex Billing because we want to
Mhm.
give pricing flexibility, right? So you don't know what the right pricing model is in the AI world, right? Tomorrow, if a
Yeah.
model becomes 10x expensive, you or your margins are just gone, right? What gives you that flexibility to say, hey, today I'm charging X, but tomorrow if something happens to my margins, I'll just move from X to X plus 5, right?
Yeah.
And how will that propagate to your millions of users? How would it propagate to your enterprise contracts, right? So you need a billing module which is extremely flexible, which scales with your growth, and which helps you mold any kind of pricing models that you would want to do. And yeah, keeping obviously usage at the center of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the complexity that you're helping solve for is something that a lot of folks don't know about. And so, could you walk through what are the parts today of the this AI billing, or rather AI pricing structure, that you are helping standardize for not just engineering teams but administrative teams as well?
Yeah. So start with this anecdote, right? So when I started in talking about flex price to my investors, it was pretty new space. People were not used to saying, hey, but like seats used to exist forever, right? How would the enterprise workflows change? How would the contract change, right? So I used to always tell them billing would become an infrastructure problem, right? You'll have a huge database on the back end, you will have real-time events coming into it, and you don't build databases, right? You buy databases. So first of all, the conversation of saying, hey, will people build billing, usage-based billing, or will people buy an external product out of it? Second, it's an infrastructure problem with a lot of workflows on top of it. So I'll tell you, I'll give you a few examples of it. For example, if you are a AI company, right? You are signing an enterprise contract with a customer. What kind of complexities it can have? It can have a complexity of say, hey, for first 3 months, we want to do a POC and we'll give you, and the POC will have, let's say, a $10,000 worth of it, right? And post that, we will give you a million minutes worth of commitments, right? And that would be charged, those minutes would be charged for first 500K minutes, we will charge you X amount. For another 500K, we'll charge you Y amount. The payment terms is entirely different. For first, like 500K, will bill you in advance, right? For the remaining, we would want to bill you in arrear. So all of these complexities are pretty much like for every enterprise contract I sign a new kind of pricing model, right? Which my tech team would essentially need to sit and just write through in their code itself, right? And that's where the entire complexity sits. So there is obviously the tech side of things, and then there is the strategic challenge with this. The second challenge is as soon as your contract is signed, in 80% of the enterprise companies that we work with, right? These guys take more than 30 days to make a contract to a customer live, right? And then when they send their first invoice, it takes them another 25 days on top of it. Because they need to look at the contract, they need to look at the data, they need to reconcile the entire thing. It's like a 10-page PDF and you need to consolidate into a single value of invoice, right? And that's where the entire page sits. So engineering team needs a constant maintenance of the system, right? And then finance team is always getting a delayed response, right? In terms of how the pricing is evolving. If we have sold something to a customer that our engineering team can support today, that answer is always not known to finance teams. And that's how this entire system becomes really, really complex to manage.
Could you walk us through if possible, a real customer example of how they are using the product today, from essentially deployment to end-to-end utilization? If you hit on some of the components that you hit on, how to use credits, wallets, entitlements, all of the functionality, essentially, that'd be great.
So we work with this really large voice AI company, right? I'll tell you the how the entire conversation happened there, right? So when we went in, we told them, hey, we are a usage-based billing company. What we can do is we can help you meter the usage. We can give you accurate invoices, and your finance team can like pretty much work faster, right? Their finance team came to us and said, hey, we are all good, right? We don't have any problem at all. Then we started talking to their engineering teams. And then we realized there were two engineers in a 25% people company, right, who were constantly maintaining billing, right? Every single pricing model that got changed, these guys need to go back to the code, hard code the new pricing model and say, this is the new invoices. Like their customer dashboards were never consistent with how the invoice numbers looks like, right? So we went in, we told them, hey, what we can do is we can run a small POC. What you can do with us is you can start streaming all the events to Flexprice system, right? You must be doing it with Postog or mixed panels of the world. And then what we started realizing was the product went live with the company and we saw 80% drop in the billing inquiries that the customers were having. And the customers were having really weird inquiries, right? Which was, hey, I have topped up $20, right? I have not gotten the access of XYZ product, right? I have this product which I share with 3 of my teammates, right? I don't understand what kind of usage every one of these guys are doing, and hence I'm not sure what kind of bill I'll get out of it, right? So these kind of problems when these engineers are facing pretty much every single day. So we solved the engineering part first, and then we went to the finance team. We said, hey guys, we already have all of your events. We already have pretty much all of your pricing structures. If you can give us your enterprise contracts, what we can do is we can let you know if there are revenue leaks in your system, right? And that was it, right? So we took all of their 100 enterprise contracts, we configured all of them into Flexprice system, and what we saw was there was more than 500K in revenue leaks every single month, right? And that revenue leak was huge because these guys were charging pretty much subscription, like fixed subscription charges to their customer, and no usage overage was getting charged, right? There was price escalations that were baked into the contract, but they could not take it because no one would read the contract and see if there is a 10% price escalation happening there, right? So these guys had a structure, an Excel sheet, and they just constantly kept doing what it was doing, right? There were upgrades in the contracts, there were downgrades in the contracts, customer got churned. There was no reconciliation in terms of what was happening there. So we went in, we said, hey, we'll just configure all of these contracts. And the time they used to send their invoices, like for example, if I want to send the invoice on 1st of every month, these guys used to take 25 days to do it. And with Flexprice, they were 25 days to do that. And then they had to reconcile all of those invoice data with their customers, right? So their customer used to ask them, hey, my customer dashboard says something else, but your invoice is coming at something else, right? And that's why FlexPrice came in and said, hey guys, your entire data, your entire billing, the source of truth is FlexPrice's system, right? And you will only invoice what your customer sees on their dashboard, right? And now this entire team can reduce that sending invoice cycle from 25 days to 2 days. Now finance team has all the clarity of what kind of revenue is coming in, which all customers are churning, where are upgrades happening, where are downgrades happening, everything at all, right? And that's why a centralized billing system like FlexPrice enables a lot for both tech team and finance team. And this is generally how the workflow looks like in a company.
Manish, one of the pieces that you hit on earlier was the fact that the pricing structure of an AI company is constantly evolving, which makes sense because it's such a nascent industry. Once FlexPrice is introduced into a customer and the engineering team has integrated it, how often does the administrator have to ask their engineering team, hey, I need to update? Or is the admin pretty much able to make any updates themselves in their dashboard?
Yeah, if the integration is done well, we have spent time with the team, all the components are in sync currently. You can change the pricing model with zero engineering effort. You don't need to ask your engineer to do any changes at all. A finance person, an admin can go onto the product, create enterprise contracts, change their pricing models, look at their margins, look at their cost at a customer level. Like everything that you would want to do around revenue ops is being centralized through a single dashboard, right? And on top of it, today you decide, hey, there are X number of events that were charged incorrectly from their system, right? They maybe misfired a few events, they maybe fired lesser number of events, and the invoice got created. What they just simply need to do is they'll just ask the tech team to resend those events, just click a recompute button, and the new invoice will get created. They don't need to say, hey, this was X amount, this was Y amount, this was the event change, this was the price. They don't need to worry about any of that. And that's why this entire system is powerful, right? And that's why, again, flex price and not flex billing. So giving you the flexibility to price the way you want.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's the power
fantastic.
you want to give to the admins and the finance teams.
How, as you've built out the product and started selling in market, do you find that your customer base tends to be earlier stage AI companies, or do you find that your customers are larger companies that are in their own transition process of moving from seat based to more of a utilization AI based pricing model?
So both of these companies pretty much. Obviously, the early stage companies, Series A, Series B kind of companies are faster moving companies. But interestingly, we are now working with Europe's biggest bank, Europe's biggest cloud company. These guys don't run cloud previously. They were into some other business and now they are opening up cloud, and hence this is a new kind of an offering, right? And all of these companies were pretty much companies that used to have a subscription based pricing, was running it for last 5 years, and now these guys are saying, hey, this is like a new kind of margin profile that we are seeing, and our PNL looks just drastically bad, right? And now we want to evolve with these kind of pricing models, and that's when flex price came into existence, right? And this kind of a shift from companies which are extremely huge, sizey, obviously the complexity is there, right? These guys have unaudited contracts of last 5-10 years, right, with thousands of customers, right? The complexity is there, but the good part is these companies have now realized that if they don't move towards usage, if they don't charge their customers basis the value that they provide to their customers are going to get churned, right? So the good part about AI is the better you create your product, the value of seats start going down, right? So if you say my product is 10x better, the company would require 10x lesser number of seats from your product, right? And hence this just becomes no brainer for these companies to start adopting to pricing. The good part, we started with these fast moving companies, Series A, seed stage companies, and now we are working with some of the huge enterprises in US, Europe, across the globe.
Makes sense. Who do you find is your point of contact and your buyer within a company? Does that change based on size of company or profile of company?
It changes quite a lot. For new age companies, and again, earlier when the companies used to be built, it was always like if it's a 200 people company, there would be 100 engineers, 100 non-tech people, right? Now that ratio for early stage companies has skewed immensely towards engineers, right? So if you have a 50 people company, you'll have 45 engineers now, right? So the decision making that used to happen with C-suite or finance or procurement, right, now sits with engineering. So these guys pretty much look at the product, evaluate the product, say yes or no about the product, And then the entire decision left with is what kind of pricing you want to negotiate with the finance teams, right? So for early stage companies, the decision pretty much flows from the engineering team to the leadership, right? But for slightly bigger companies which are still conventional, follows the CFO cycle of bringing in a software, would still require us to go through a finance person, and the finance person would introduce us to the tech people inside the company. They'll evaluate the product, finance will evaluate from their own lens, and then it will converge to procurement. So yeah, but yeah, engineers move really fast in early stage companies. So yeah, good,
I imagine.
good thing for us. Yeah.
I imagine that first group buys a lot quicker. That buying cycle is a
Yeah.
lot better. Yeah, that makes sense. Uh, so as you think about your own monetization, can you walk through your pricing structure in depth and just walk through how do you charge customers and how do you align that pricing with value?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, billing has always been a category where people used to charge you basis revenue, right? So people used to tell you, hey, if you process 100K worth of revenue through us, you'll need to pay us $750, for example, right? 0.75%, 0.5% of the revenue share. From the get-go itself, we said, hey, this is a developer product, right? We are positioning it like a database product, right? So we need to charge it like a database, right? So our product is a combination of some subscription to start with, which is pretty much like a fixed fee, right? And on top of it, the number of events that you process through the system. So today, if you do, for example, 5 million usage events, you'll pay us X amount, right? And it will grow exponentially as your growth goes up. So we don't take a rev share. So we are saying our pricing model is much flatter, and we will only charge if you actually see a surge in your customer growth, right? And not just arbitrary on the basis of revenue cuts.
How do customers respond to that, particularly the event scaling, increasing pricing? Do you find that the engineering teams and finance teams of your customers have to think pretty deeply around how to structure their own product, or is that process already thought through by the time they're talking with you?
So engineering teams pretty much have this idea of how to buy event-based products, right? So they have bought Postdoc in the past, they have bought Mixpanel, they have bought a lot of databases in the past, right? So they pretty much understand that nuance. But you can control the type of events that you are sending to FlexPrice. So today you decide that, hey, this is the 100 million event contract we are doing with FlexPrice today. And let's say if you see that 100 million is going to 500 million next year, right? So what you can do is you can always go back and say, hey, we want to reduce these X amount of events because we don't pretty much charge for these events, right? And that's how the entire conversation becomes much simpler when we go through an engineering front and then move to a finance person, right? So the procurement cycle looks like we are pretty much a database company or a dev tool, right? And that's how the conversation becomes easier. Having said that, finance team, where the entire buyer kind of a persona lives, they are very hesitant when you say we want to take a rev share, right? Even if it's a small number of 0.01, zero 0.1, whatever percentage, they are just very hesitant about it because they don't they just look at PNLs from a future perspective. So they'll say, hey, I'm doing $5 million today. If 2 years down the line I'm doing $50 million, these guys will take like $1 million out of me, right? That's not cool, right? And that's why this event plus a fixed subscription, which gives you some sort of predictability, which have the room for your growth and our growth as well, just sits in perfectly with the pricing that we are seeing.
That makes sense. What does deployment look like today? How much effort from your side does it take to get a customer deployed, and more specifically deployed really successfully, such that that admin question I asked earlier, that non-technical admin can go in and change things? Like, what's that from your end?
Got it. So if the intent is high from the customer, they actually want to put in effort and try to solve the problem, we can deploy the entire stack in 2 to 3 weeks, tested live in their product, right? But obviously, if the intents are low, if there is a lot of juggle happening within the company as well, it generally takes quite a more time, right? So, for example, in case of enterprise, it may take up to 3 months, right? The good part about the product is, even if my product takes 3 months in a smaller scale company, you cannot uproot billing, right? Billing is like like we used to ERP in the past, right? Finance team cannot just change billing systems overhaul, right? So if you look at it from in last 1.5, like pretty much 2 years, right? We have zero churn, right? Not even a single logo has moved out of FlexPrice as of yet, right? And that just says a lot, right? Today AI companies are flipping left, right, and center, right? You buy a product today, you change it to something else tomorrow, right? But it's an extremely sticky product. Obviously, it's hard to get in because again, same problem, right? You don't want to uproot your existing systems, but once you get in, the product shuts with the when the company shuts. So it's so hard to get out of it because it's entirely all of your invoices are going through a system, all of your billing is coming through a system, all of your sales team, finance teams, engineering teams are interacting with the system, right? It's a huge lift.
And so, do you find that do you have a concept of a forward deployed engineer who's very
Yeah.
integrated into the customer? Like, how's that work?
Yeah, that's working like very amazing for us. The good part is, as we are here in India, the engineering resources are like one third the price compared to what you see in US, right? So we have more flexibility of putting in more forward deployed engineers, right? And the good part is for bigger enterprises, this is like the primary demand that these guys have. So they just tell us, hey, we want to control your roadmap. So we just tell them, hey guys, you don't you don't want to control the entire roadmap. What we can do for you is we can give you a private repo and a forward deployed engineer for that. So whatever changes you want to make on top of it, you can get this person to make those changes in your system, deploy it in your system if there are any custom features on top of it, right? So my core product does not get impacted unless I don't want it to be getting impacted, right? And hence this entire model of saying, hey, there's a forward deployed engineer who can get working from the get go becomes really powerful for us. It helps us not cannibalize the core value of the product by not making a lot of customizations to it. Plus, it gives a lot of freedom and comfort to enterprise customers and say, hey, this is like an amazing product, and we can build as much customizations as we would want it to be, and with pretty much
Nice.
zero lock-in.
Nice. Shifting a bit to competition, once a company decides to solve for this problem, who is FlexPrice typically competing against in the RFP or in that sales process?
So there is one company called Metronome. They got recently acquired by Stripe. Then there is another company called Orb. These guys are doing amazing work, working with some of the big logos, right? So these are the companies where we actually see a competition coming in, right? But our entire flexibility sits in us being open source, right? So what you can essentially do is tomorrow, if FlexPrice dies, you have all the code out in public, right? You can just redeploy the entire code and run it on your own, right? So you have that flexibility of saying that this company exists forever, right? There have been cases in the past where people bought a billing product, right? And the company got shut, right? And they were pretty much left with no options, right? What do they do in that case? So being open source, being able to be auditable from their engineering team, being able to be said that, hey, there are like 3,500 people who already trust this product, right? How do you make sure that the trust is always there, right? And that's where we've been with these kind of companies like Metronome and all when we do direct one-on-one competition. But yeah, obviously these are much more evolved products. These guys are building it with a much wider audience, a much smarter audience, sharper audience as well. But I think the product will catch up. That's not a problem. The good part is our product trust signals looks really strong, and it's an engineering first product. And as I said, right, 90% of the companies are now engineering first companies. So it just gets in really easy.
Makes sense. And so I think the open source comment is a really good strategy, particularly when you're earlier stage, to kind of combat
Yeah.
that issue from a customer perspective. As you guys grow and as balance sheet doesn't become a problem for yourselves, and obviously it's not for Metronome or for Orb right now, where do you see a difference in core product functionality, or how you guys think about segmentation, or are you guys all competing for the same one large market?
So every company in the world, right? Every software company in the world spends 5 to 10% of their COGS just managing their revenue, right? It is their CPQ, it is their payment gateways, their billings, receivables, accounts, right? Like this entire stack, right? And every company, like Metronome, went really deep into just solving the usage-based billing piece, right? Same with all these guys are really deep into solving the usage-based billing piece. For us, we want to solve the entire revenue cycle through AI workflows, right? Which is how do you make sure that once your contract is signed, right, you get your money on time from the customers with lesser DSO, with minimal input effort, right? And this would require us to build billing today. Tomorrow we'll work with finance team to build an AR module on top of it, then collection modules and dunning and so on and so forth, right? So the space is both vertical and horizontal, and different companies will choose their own bits, right? So we feel we want to go deeper into from we will start from the developer stuff today to go deeper into how do we solve the finance workflows, right? Because that is where there is a very minimal disruption happened due to AI, right? So I just keep referring to that chart that Anthropic shared a few months back, where exactly are the model capabilities and where exactly are the deployments. So finance had like the widest gap on that, right? So Claude can do a lot of stuff, but it's not deployed in finance workflows, right? I think we have a very fair path to that direction. But having said that, obviously there are competitions, there is incumbent, like all of those things will always be there. But the good part is, if I'm saying every software company spends 5 to 10% of it, that's a huge chunk to take. And this is not a winner takes all kind of a market. People will build their small own niches and will scale it from there.
Yeah, there's a reason there's that much competition. Is it's a huge market. Yeah. I'd love to get your thoughts kind of more broadly on what are you seeing today from the market in terms of pricing? How are the startups pricing in particular? But equally important is how are some of the larger players, how are they adjusting their pricing?
Yeah. So I think for startups, it's really easy to say, hey, we started our pricing with usage, right? Because there is pretty much no book, like there is no sales that they have done in the past which acts as a burden for them today, right? So they can pretty much start with saying, hey, we want to align our pricing closest to the value, so we'll start with usage, right? For enterprise, it's really hard. So these guys have sold seats in the past, subscription in the past for last 10 years, right? And now when they go back and say that we have been taking predictable revenue from you, and now we want to add a variable layer on top of it, and that's how this conversations become tricky. So what people have started doing is they have really innovated in that direction. So what we do is we say, hey, you don't need to think of it like an infinite variable cost, right? You can think of it in smaller commitments, right? You can do different kind of payment cycles on top of it, right? You can think of it as a credit module, right? So all of these things caps your cost, right? You still have a usage component to it, but there is an end to how much a company would spend with your products, right? So this is how the enterprise have evolved. So they still do usage-based pricing, but very smartly put into their previous contracts, from moving from a seat-based pricing to saying that there are commitments, there are minimum commitments, there are true ups, and so on and so forth, right? And this is how they save their margins, as well as making sure that there is predictability for the buyer as well.
Do you think that AI pricing can stay this complex, or will customers push for simpler models in general?
Yeah. So I think I get this question quite a lot. If you had asked me for this question 2 years back, I would have said maybe people will move to a simpler model at some point in time, right? But what's happening is, when we started building FlexPrice, 31% of the entire software companies were doing usage-based pricing, right? Now that number is 75%, right? And pretty much all the huge organizations, which were like the stalwarts of subscription and seat-based pricing, have moved towards usage-based pricing. So will we be able to go back to a simpler subscription-based pricing? The answer is no, right? Will the pricing evolve from here into different variations or purpose? Yes, right? So the pricing today can say, hey, we are doing consumption-based pricing, right? Tomorrow we want to experiment with an outcome-based pricing or a combination of both, right? So having a billing system that can, like, my only purpose as a founder is to make sure that I'm always ahead of what's coming, right, in terms of pricing. So you don't need to think about, hey, if tomorrow I want to move towards a use outcome-based pricing, I would need a different provider to do that, right? So this is a single product. Once integrated, whatever new pricing models will come in, product will handle it, right? So tomorrow you decide I want to do subscription and outcome combined, we can do that as well, right? So going back towards a subscription, more predictable kind of a pricing, it just seems hard to me. To top it up, I generally get this argument of saying, hey, but we are seeing model costs are collapsing crazy, right? But if you see Google I/O's recent thing, you'll see that their AI usage has grown like hundreds of folds compared to last year, right? And for the first time ever, right, it's happening that the compute cost is not just a function of variability, it's a function of quality as well, right? So if you are using an Opus 4.7 versus a Sonnet model, the pricing difference is huge because the quality of Opus 4.7 is better, right? This was not true when you were using like an AWS or a GCP, where costs were predictable. If you have like 5 servers running, they'll just give you a predictable cost, right? So as these models improve, the previous models will keep on getting cheaper, but the new models will become like a 10x expensive model, right? So this becomes like a race to the bottom for these companies to just make sure that if we make our best models cheaper, they anyways don't eat into their margins.
A question for you there, because you already beat me to the next question, so I love this. You must get this, every day or at least every week. People are asking this. So you hit on something interesting there, which is that as model costs decrease, there'll just be essentially new ways to go use the frontier models. How are you internally using models? Is it just in the building of the product? Is that where most of your inference costs are today?
So there are two specific places where our inference costs are going today. First is obviously the internal use that the team is doing while using maybe Claude or cursors and so on and so forth. And second is the new set of products that we are launching for the finance teams, right? Which is extremely agentic in nature. It will constantly look at your contracts. It will constantly bring in terms. It will constantly identify what kind of revenue leaks are there. It will constantly nudge you to say, hey, this is a singular dashboard, which is pretty much like a co-work for finance teams, right? You come onto the dashboard, you see what's happening, and by the end of this month, you are ready to close your books fast, right? So that is where we are spending a lot of our energy. And what we have seen is Claude models are like crazy good. Like the difference is huge, right? When it comes to longer memory, context holding, and then just doing the right things, right? So I think for internal purpose, we use Claude like for pretty much everything. Yeah. And yeah, I think this is pretty much it.
I see. So is it correct to say that your current product is probably inference heavy in building it, inference light in delivering it, but your future product is going to be both, essentially inference heavy
Correct.
in both sides? And do you, because everyone I talk to when they deliver products says, okay, well, we're using the higher models early in the process, but once they hit an evaluation bar that kind of it's good, we kind of degrade down. So is your point of view that, hey, even if that happens, we'll just continue delivering more and more functionality on the
Yeah, we will keep on delivering better models, better functionalities, because essentially if you downgrade the model, that means your customer gets less value or a bad product. But if you are building for finance, like 99% is not good enough, right? So if models keep on evolving better, we need to keep on ramping up our models to give a better high quality results every single time, right? And that's where in a company like what we are building for next, like for finance workflows, it's really hard to clamp it down to a slower, a lesser functional model, right? So yeah, I think for us, it would always be a function of what's better for our customers. And I think what I've seen and what I've experienced so far is if you build a great product, pricing is not something that people genuinely care a lot about, right? So if you keep on building great products, if you keep on delivering great results, your margins will take care of themselves at some point.
How do you see agentic interactions coming into play, particularly on your existing product state? Do you see folks making changes through kind of MCP servers over time? Do you see folks interacting with AI agents to help them determine the right pricing? Like how's your existing product built or will be built to interact with more of an agentic decisioning system?
Yeah. So I'll tell you not just the product, but I just emphasize on this a lot internally, which is my entire company should be queryable in nature, right? So everyone in the company should be able to query everything in the product, right? Which is what my content engine looks like. Can I write how Manish writes, right? Can I write how my other co-founders write? Can I write like my content person, right? Everything in the company that we build is queryable. And hence, once everything is queryable, you export those kind of things outside. So Flexprice can be managed like pretty much 100% from an MCP or from a CLI, and people use it quite a lot, right? I get these inbound requests where people ask us, hey, guys, can you respond with just yes and no that your product has MCP and CLI? And we only then I'll consider Flexprice. And we just say yes, and then they just come on board, try the product, and just get on with it, right? So if you build a developer product, you need to be at the forefront of the new tech that's coming, right? And I think it all starts from within, right? And hence I always say that if you want to build an AI first product and not a product which has an AI layer on top of it, that would mean your entire organization should look like a queryable database company, right? Which is every knowledge base, everything that you talk about should be out, and anyone in the org should be able to look at it, query it, talk about it.
Makes sense. Last question for you, Manish. You've hinted at this already, but over the next 3-5 years, where do you see Flexprice evolving both in terms of product, in terms of go-to-market motion?
I think I generally give this answer that the market that we are chasing is extremely huge. It's not a net zero kind of a problem, right? We don't need to take a lot of share from existing players to make sure that there is revenue for us. This is a net new kind of a market, right? That we are trying to evolve. So we are saying that, hey, like tomorrow, if your entire cash flow used to take 30 days to hit your bank, what can we do to make sure that 30 days is reduced to 1 day, right? And that's the kind of product we want to build. And we want to make sure that even at $1 billion valuation, even at a $5 billion valuation, the entire company can pretty much run with a single finance person, right? And that's the goal for next 5 years. And that would require us to build a lot of products on the finance direction. That would require us to build a lot of agentic products on top of it, and whatever new tech comes alongside it. So that's like a constant focus to make sure that we declutter the entire revenue stack and rethink the entire stack from an AI and agentic view. And I think that is going to be a huge task in itself because it's a very complex, very hard market to crack. And I think enough for us to spend next half a decade to a decade.
Yeah, Manish, this was fantastic, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was my conversation with Manish Choudhary, co-founder and CEO of Flexprice. The big takeaway for me is AI is not just changing what software can do, it's changing how it's priced. For the last decade plus, SaaS was built around the seat. But when AI lets smaller teams produce more output, the seat becomes a weaker measure of value. That pushes companies towards the usage and eventually towards outcomes. And once that happens, billing becomes much more than invoices and payments. It becomes infrastructure. It has to connect product usage, contracts, credits, pricing rules, audit trails, revenue recognition, and cash flow. That is what makes Flexprice interesting. The wedge is not just usage-based billing, it's trust. If billing becomes mission-critical infrastructure, customers need to know the software is auditable, durable, and not a black box. That's where open source may matter, and that's why Flexprice is betting on it. Thanks for watching Terminal Value, and I'll see you next week.